So we need to be able to measure the pressure of a gas, which means we need units to use. So the simplest unit is the atmosphere, abbreviated ATM, and that's the average atmospheric pressure at sea level. The SI unit of pressure is the Pascal, abbreviated capital PA, and that is defined as 1 Newton per square meter. So 1 Pascal equals 1 Newton per square meter. That's not a unit that we use in chemistry, but that indicates what pressure is. It's a force over an area, force divided by area. So Newton is a unit of force, and then square meter is a unit of area. The Pascal is a much smaller unit than the atmosphere. 1 atmosphere is actually 101,325 pascals. You might need this relationship occasionally, but you shouldn't memorize that. How do we measure pressure? And where, well, I guess that's just a little disjointed. Anyway, let's just talk about this. This is an illustration of the original type of barometer. It involved a long glass tube completely full of mercury and then inverted into a dish of mercury. If you do this at home with a glass of water, say, and the sink, and you invert the glass quickly so it doesn't spill out, the water will stay in the cup. Because the pressure of the atmosphere pushing down will support a column of water that's up to 34 feet tall. Mercury is an element that's a metal, and it's a liquid at room temperature, and its density is almost 14 times greater than water. So for a given amount, it's much heavier. So the atmosphere can support a column of mercury that's 760 millimeters tall. That's equivalent to 29.92 inches tall. So 760 millimeters is the height of the column of mercury. That is equivalent to the atmospheric pressure at sea level. And so that became a unit of pressure measurement. So the unit is millimeter of mercury, which seems kind of weird, right? Because that's a length of an element, but it has to do with the barometer. It's the height of a column of mercury. Any questions about that? Some other units. Millimeter of mercury is a weird unit, and so they created a new unit called a torr in honor of Torricelli, who was the guy who came up with the barometer. So a torr and a millimeter of mercury are exactly the same pressure. They mean the same thing, 2 different names for the same thing. We still use millimeters of mercury, so that makes it a little confusing. Sorry about that. These are the ones you should memorize just to save time. An atmosphere is equal to 760 millimeters of mercury or 760 torr. Those units are exact. The numbers are exact, I mean. Okay, so this is not 2 sig figs. That's exact. They're defined that way. This is a table showing some common units of pressure. All of these things are equal to each other. So 101,325 pascals, that's the average air pressure at sea level, which is also 1 atmosphere, 760 millimeters of mercury, 760 torr, 14.7 psi. You might be familiar with that unit. PSI stands for pounds per square inch, and 29.92 inches of mercury. This is just measuring that column of mercury with an English ruler in inches instead of in millimeters or centimeters. Any questions? So we should be able to convert pressure units just using dimensional analysis like we've done with other units. So if we need to convert 1.25 atmospheres to torr, any pressure conversions can be done in one step because of how this table is set up. All of these are equal to each other, and so you can just go from one to the other. So 1.25 atmospheres, and I'm going to go to torr. I need 1 conversion factor. Torr goes on top, ATM's on the bottom. Then I find the relationship. 760 torr is equal to 1 atmosphere. So 1.25 times 760. Calculator says 950 torr. Practicing our significant figures. The starting number, 1.25 atmospheres, is a measurement that's 3 sig figs. The conversion factor is exact, so we should end up with 3 sig figs. As I've written it, it's ambiguous and it looks more like 2. You could put a decimal point here, or the better thing to do is put this into scientific notation. 9.50 times 10 to the 2 torr. Any questions? Torr is the name of a unit. Just no, it's derived from a scientist named Torricelli, but it's not short. It's just torr. Kind of like a nickname. And yeah.
And this is only for mercury, right? So,
pardon me?
and this just for mercury?
No, that's a good question though. These relationships are measuring the pressure of the atmosphere. Okay, so you can measure the pressure of the atmosphere without using mercury. The reason mercury shows up is because of the original barometer involved mercury, and it was the measurement of a column of mercury. So 760 millimeters of mercury. You can measure atmospheric pressure using other liquids, but then the unit would be, inches of water or something, and the numbers would be hugely different. Let's do this one. 30.15 inches of mercury equals how many millimeters of mercury? Again, this can be done in one step. So, inches of mercury, 1 conversion factor. Millimeters of mercury on the top, inches of mercury on the bottom. Now, if you didn't have the table, you could do this by converting inches to millimeters. But since you have these relationships, it's faster to use those. I'll give you this table on an exam. So we look on here and we find 760 millimeters of mercury and 29.92 inches of mercury. Remember, each of these is equal to the others. They're all describing the same thing. So 760 on top, 29.92 on the bottom. My calculator shows me 765.84 and then 2246, a whole bunch of numbers. How many significant figures? 4. The starting number has 4. The 760 is exact. This 29.92 is not exact. Well, wait a minute. No, you shouldn't think of that as exact. In this case, it doesn't matter because of this. Oh, that looks like meters. This is inches. So we should have 4 significant figures, so we should call this 765.8 millimeters of mercury. Any questions? Convert a pressure of 173 inches of mercury into pounds per square inch. When we look at this table, here's pounds per square inch, abbreviated PSI, 14.7. We're going to need that number. So we've got 173 inches of mercury, and we're trying to get to PSI. Converting pressure units can always be done in one step. So we can go just put PSI on top, inches of mercury on the bottom. From the table on the previous slide, we get the numbers. 14.7 psi is equivalent to 29.92 inches of mercury. You do not have to go through atmospheres. Just go from one unit directly to the other. So 173 times 14.7 divided by 29.92 equals 84.996. This is 3 sig figs. This is 3. That's 4. So this should have 3 significant figures. When I round this, the 9 rounds this 9 up to a 10, which rounds this up to a 5. But I don't want to say 85 because now I've only got 2 sig figs. It needs to be 0.0 psi. Questions?